Welcome to Dr. Roger and Friends, the bright side of longevity, hosted by three Ps in a podcast, Doc Roger, Teresa, and Danielle. Thanks for joining us for coffee and conversation.
Well, hello, everybody. Ladies, so good to see you again. Well, today we're going to deal with something I think that, first of all, is universal, it seems, right now, or at least a universal need for it. But I'll preface it by, I just finished an article in the Harvard School of Public Health magazine that comes out. And this author talks about the age of trauma. Saying that the last 5 years or so, and now we all know this, but let's put it into perspective. We have been dealing with things that are almost a once in a lifetime type of things all together. You know, so there's the pandemic, of course, the escalating gun violence, the political dialogue that's going on, and the divisiveness that is throughout society. Very vitriolic, very strong divisiveness. You know, it's the you they thing. We're also talking about, climate, of course, is still there, and an opioid epidemic. I mean, that's just a few of the things we're dealing with. We just saw that the average life expectancy went down significantly over these last few years because of the COVID, the pandemic, and the opioid crisis. So, I mean, let's face it, our society is in upheaval. And his point is that this is the age of trauma. This is very traumatic for all of us. Okay, now we're always, as individuals, going through what's in our head, struggling what's in our head, and that monkey mind and all the things that we struggle with. And the last thing we should be doing now, I think, is to make things worse by not having our stuff together. I mean, we never really do, but at least being able to go in a direction where we can manage, continue to navigate the world, and hopefully grow even during this time of trauma. So, I mean, it's almost like post-traumatic stress syndrome, except we're still in the middle of all of this trauma. How do we maneuver through all of that? So that's what we want to talk about. That's a huge slice, ladies, but I rely on both of you as certified coaches and what you do every day to help me. And I will ask questions occasionally that I think represent what the average person, I tend to be an average person, would ask, and so to make sure that we provide them what they need. But okay, so that's it. We're in a time of upheaval, a time of trauma. How can we make ourselves, our head, our emotions, how can we put them and get them in a place where we can continue to navigate this world, stay sane, stay upbeat, and grow during all of this time? Teresa, what do you think?
Absolutely. There's so much going on in the world, and those are factual things that are absolutely going on in the world. And then our mind just goes swirling, right? We have this constant input of things that seem wildly out of control, and certainly are out of our control. And then our brains just go swirling and try to interpret it, try to make sense of it, try to, in some ways, control it. So there's so much that happens in our brains, right? And it feels like, truly the human brain, they think, has about 60,000 thoughts a day. So that is a lot of thoughts. And then there's a lot going on in the world. So there's so much happening inside our brain, and it can be disorienting and confusing and overwhelming and frustrating, just to name a few. And so my approach is always to have people write down what are the thoughts that are happening in your mind, right? Let's get them all on paper. And very, very often it's surprising. There's usually not more than 10 thoughts that are spinning, that the record is spinning currently, right? So we get them on paper. That's step one.
Might be an example of one, Teresa.
An example.
What could you give me an example of what one of those might be?
Absolutely. It could be a fear-based thought of getting COVID. It could be just the overwhelm of there's so much political divide in our country, and there's nothing I can do about it, right? It could be any of those types of thoughts.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Our brains also like to pose questions. It's almost taunting that brains like to taunt us with questions, and they're usually terrible questions that there is no possible good answer. Like, the planet's going to hell. What are you going to do about it? What can you do about it? That's a terrible question to ask, right? So whenever our brain is posing questions, it's good to turn those into a sentence, right? Take the question mark off, make it into a sentence, and that's how you find the underlying thought. But step one, be a better eavesdropper on what your brain is offering you. Almost shift into the role of a court reporter. Just get it documented. Step one, you have no opinion. You're not judging it. Just document it. See what your brain is actually doing.
It's almost like from a wrangler's metaphor, throwing a rope around a thought. When it's just rattling around in your brain, it just keeps coming back. It's like a big backpack that you carry with you. But when you write it down, I would think that is a process of making it real, making it tangible. And as I said, throwing a rope around it. And I could see that as being not necessarily cathartic, but at least, to sort of calm you down a little bit, and start to look at these as tangible things and that I have to manage. So I like that.
Absolutely.
Danielle, what do you think?
I love that. And there's so much evidence to support narrative writing and journaling just as a form of therapy to get it out of your system. And it is interesting that people start to see patterns like Teresa had mentioned, where it's the same stuff cycling over and over again. And I think this is a really good approach once you do that, to kind of start looking at what those questions are and asking yourself, is that true? The thing that comes up a lot for me are not even specific things about necessarily COVID, or am I going to keep my job or lose my job? They're things like, am I worthwhile as a person?
Mm-hmm.
Like getting to the real core of the value people place on themselves, or if they're changing jobs, who am I to be thinking that I can step into this role? So that people are having a lot of big thoughts. And as Teresa mentioned, not necessarily helpful thoughts. So I think looking at them and just asking, is that true? And one of the indicators that I like to use is if you find yourself saying, this person always does this, or I can't possibly do that. I'm too stupid to learn computers, or I can't do that. Whenever there's an absolute, that's the time to ask, is that true? What else might be true? And what could I do if that weren't true? And it's kind of almost playing the devil's advocate on your thoughts and challenging them.
Absolutely. The first question is it true? And the second question is it serving me? Is that thought serving me? And I mean, if thoughts are always available to us, and there's an infinite number of thoughts available to us, we should probably go ahead and think the ones that are both true and that serve us. Why not?
I may be jumping ahead here, and tell me if I am, but I'm thinking of Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. And this particular thing I'm going to say was really about stress. But let's face it, this is what trauma and our reaction to it is. It's a very stressful. So he says there's only three things you can really do when you have a stressful thing. And again, I may be jumping ahead, but you'll manage it. Is to fix it, or to make a plan to fix it. So I would think in this situation, are you saying, is this something I can do to fix? Can I fix this really? And if I can, then what is it that I should do? And the second thing is to just walk away from it, to decide that is not something that should even be in my head. It is nothing I can do about it. And that's just it. And that's the third one, is to accept it as the reality. And okay, we're in a very traumatic time, and I have to accept that and move on with my life. Navigate, grow, be, as Gandhi says, be the example of what you want the world to be. That sort of thing. What do you think?
Yeah, those are three different types of thoughts that a person could choose. And the question is, what feels the most true for you and what would serve you the best? One of those three different types of thoughts that absolutely you could think instead, right? Think intentionally, to think on purpose. It always has to be true. We're not talking unicorns and rainbows here. We're talking true thoughts that do serve you. And one of those three types of thoughts that you just mentioned absolutely would be true for the person and probably would serve them very well, much better than the original thought.
Yeah. And I like that idea too of what thoughts are not helpful and looking at them with like healthy skepticism. It's not saying that you should be, if you find yourself being overly negative or overly positive, that could be a problem. Not that positive is necessarily bad, but if you're like, it's going to be great and you're not feeling it, then you're kind of setting yourself up for disappointment. So a healthy skepticism, looking both sides of the issue and just being able to say, okay, this is the situation. As you mentioned, Roger, what can I change? What's in my control? And sometimes it's just how you look at something. It's your thought about it versus the actual action. What can't I control? What am I going to accept? And what am I going to say, no, thank you? And sometimes that no, thank you and walking away might be changing a thought. It could actually be physically leaving people in situations that are unhealthy. So you're not jumping ahead, but it's such a big, big topic.
Masterpiece provides communities with personalized content that keeps residents engaged and focused on their unique pathway to healthy longevity, no matter the circumstance or external influence. Powered by Masterpiece provides communities with the data and research needed to drive both the resident and community forward. Learn more at mymasterpieceliving.com.
I don't want to do it again, but I can imagine someone saying, listening to this, I'm on social media all the time and I'm on the internet all the time and I'm hearing all this stuff, some of which I'm finding out isn't true. Some is true. I don't know what's true. And it's really making me crazy,
Mm-hmm.
So I know that's a more tangible thing than what we're talking about, but it seems to me it has to be part of this picture if that's feeding the beast, so to speak.
Absolutely. Well, our diet is not just what we eat, but it's what we allow to be inputted into our lives and our brains. And we've got to change the channel. Notice what channel you're dialed into, literally and figuratively. And is that channel serving you? At least give equal airtime, to a different channel. So that might be literally changing the channel on social media or the TV, but it could be changing the channel in your own brain. We have about an 80% negativity bias, the research is showing. So, and that's our primitive brain doing its job. Like, is to a point you've made many times before, Roger, is that a rock in the grass or a snake? Better to assume it's a snake because, that's the safer option. So the brain is going to choose a negativity bias. That's its job, to keep us alive, right? So just know that 80% of the thoughts that you download could very likely be negative if you have a normal human brain, and that's okay. And then intentionally change that channel and at least give equal airtime to what is right, what is going well, things that nourish you and nourish your mind.
Oh, I'd like to go in on that. And again, this is you mentioned, I think before, Danielle, what is true, and I think both of you have. And, I'm thinking what I do sometimes is when my mind is swirling and I just think, how can I get through all of this in society? I mean, not so much me and my day-to-day thing, but as a part of the species and a part of my family and the grandfather of my grandkids and the husband of my wife, all that. And so for me, if you can step away And that's a big deal. And I think that's a lot of what we're talking about, to gain some perspective. So, during this COVID thing, nature became a rock star for everybody, because that is true. That is something that we can all accept as true and good. And climate change, we're trying to rearrange that, but that's okay. We can go. It's not okay, but it's happening. But for me to go out there, that's when I think I can be clearer in my assessment of what is real in my life. How does that make any sense to you?
I'm a huge advocate of taking a social media fast in general and getting outside and away from the computer. I think my biggest tip, and I'll go through days of silence. There's no computer on, there's no phone, there's no nothing. I don't even talk, if you can believe it, Roger. I'm quiet for a couple of days, and it's just a sense of peace. To me, my cue that I'm absorbing too much of those things is how reactive am I getting? So if you're looking at social media and you're like, oh, look at this pretty cat picture. Oh, look at these pretty grandbabies. And then you see something political and you're like, "Rah!" And you're ready to angry type back. Maybe that's a sign that if you're reacting that way, it's obviously affecting you negatively. Might be time to take a little bit of a social media fast.
It can be overwhelming, Ken, and that's the way we started this. And, the three of us have talked long and hard about lifestyle change and how best to do that, and how to adapt to certain things that come into our lives that are curveballs, and continue to grow. And Kaizen has always come up. Kaizen being small steps to eventually your goals or big change, but it's always about small steps towards whatever you want to do or be, or even if it's sanity, small steps. You feel that's a factor in this whole idea of dealing with the age of trauma and how we as individuals respond to it?
Absolutely. I think just like Roger, when you talk about you can Kaizen your way through a big action step, a big goal, you can Kaizen your way through a thought. If your first thought is, what should I be doing with my life? And then you start the swirling because you don't know the answer and you feel like you should know the answer, you can Kaizen and break it down and start with something smaller, like what things in my life can't I live without? What things are most important? Okay, so family, or I really like when I can socially connect or bring the community together. Start kind of looking at the things that are important. And that might be step one, and step two might be what makes that important to me? And just asking yourself little tiny questions to pick apart the thought, because it's that big. If you start with that big thought, that's when you'll start the cycling.
That sounds good to me. So I'll challenge you here, and I'll give you a few moments because I'll ramble on after I ask the question. So what advice, what would be the first Kaizen step for someone who is struggling with so much going on in the world? I don't know what to do with me, my life. I don't know how to handle this. What's my role? I want to still be helpful to my family, and yet, I'm concerned about society, and all I've been doing is sitting on the sofa sucking my thumb, metaphorically, because I'm overwhelmed. So, what would each of you say would be the first step or two towards managing that? I think you've probably already said it, but, I'd like to be kind of concrete and practical with this as to, okay, step one, what should I do? Teresa?
Yeah. Well, overwhelm leads to inaction about 99.9% of the time. And that's what we're talking about, is just complete overwhelm with so much going on, swirling thoughts. So just realizing that it's your thoughts that is creating the overwhelm, right? To really zoom in on it. It's not the circumstances of the world so much as your interpretation of that, your thoughts about that create the overwhelm, and overwhelm leads to inaction almost always. So there's nothing wrong with that. These are difficult times. Whatever is happening for you is absolutely fine. But what about a more useful emotion? Like, what thoughts do you want to think? right? That would not create overwhelm, but would maybe create intentionality or motivation, right? Some useful feeling that would drive some actions that would make a difference, that would make an impact in your life. So first of all, what are we thinking? Be a very good eavesdropper. Document those thoughts. Notice what each thought is making you feel. Is that how you want to be feeling? Does that lead to the action you want to be taking? If not, go out thought shopping. They're free, and try them on like an outfit and see how each one makes you feel, and choose a true thought that creates a useful feeling that drives the actions that you want to be taking, that creates the results that you want for yourself at this point in your life.
Wow, that sounds powerful and doable. Yeah. Danielle, what would you advise?
I'm kind of a synthesis of, I guess, being a writer and being an avid meditator and meditation facilitator. I kind of go back to those two things, which fits perfectly with what we're talking about. I think step one, when you're in that overwhelm, is just take a breath, take a few deep breaths, stimulate the vagus nerve, kind of learn how to relax a little bit. And then, as Teresa mentioned, get out a notebook and jot down what all the things I'm thinking. And as you do that, if there are ones that are unhelpful, Teresa mentioned find a new thought. Can you actually write down what might be a better thought that I can choose to believe? And then there's some practical, once you get to the place where your mind isn't all over the place and you kind of can see what's there, you can start to pick it apart. Like, okay, well, I'm not going to deal with this entire list. Pick one. What's the most important thing to me right now? And how can I break that down? What makes it important? What kind of support system, like what might I do to improve the situation? Who might I contact for support? And just asking lots of little tiny kites and questions, and if you're not sure what questions to ask yourself, think, well, what might you ask a friend if they were going through the same thing and you're being supportive? And I would also suggest be as nice to yourself as you'd be to a friend, and not yell at yourself, because we talk way nicer to our friends than we talk to ourselves.
Wow. Another one. Well, that's fantastic. That's it's practical. It's doable. It makes sense to me. And we should end there, but I want to tell just a brief story, really brief. So with this pandemic, all of our lives were totally upset. So all of those ritualistic things that brought us comfort, many were gone. And then there's all the threats that were there, not only with the pandemic, but all the other things that this article talks about. But so I started to draw, Now, it was drawing, but little did I realize at first, but soon did know that my mind went to a totally different place. I mean, I was mindful. I was present. I wasn't in my head with all of this stuff that was going on. And I would draw, and, a lot of time would go by. And when that was over, not only did I have the pleasure of having done something and doing that, but I felt much more anchored, more and peaceful, to be able to see all those things not swirling so much in my head now, but swirling out there in the world. And I'm not going to bring them back in my head. Of course, they would come in again. But when we can do things like that, and that can be anything, right? That can be with a pet, that, as we said, with nature, that can be drawing. And that's usually, we talk about those things in association with stress, but isn't this what this is all about? I mean, when we're unmoored, so to speak, and in a storm, and how do we get so that we can go in the right direction, or at least a direction, steadily to get better. So anyway, so I know you probably you have agriculture, Teresa, which that puts your mind right. I don't want to speak for you, but I'll bet it does.
It does.
And Danielle, you do about 1,000 things that like dancing.
I was going to say, Roger, you were talking about your paintings. My COVID therapy was writing 3 books in a year. So yeah. I can look at my books and you can look at your paintings and think COVID therapy. but you're talking about mindfulness. So not everybody I'm glad you brought it up, because not everybody can sit and meditate and calm their mind. But if they give your mind something to do, like paint or write or garden or anything, you're giving your brain something else to do beside cycle. So I'm really glad that you told that story.
I think we talk about meditation and mindfulness and being present, but that's kind of abstract. I think in this context, the way we have brought it up, and in this, I think it becomes, I hope it has become more real. It has for me, as to the value of this. It isn't some sort of Asian thing where you go sit up on a mountain, and in a robe, it's the way of putting yourself, your mind, your emotions, everything in a stabilized place to deal with all that other stuff that's all around you. I'm thinking. So this is really a complex topic. We should probably add to this. We should do another podcast, don't you think? And build on this.
Let's do it.
What do you think? I can hear people out there. Yeah, I want to hear more. I'm sure they are. I know I do from the two of you, because I've learned some things today. A lot of things that I may have heard, but I think this puts them now into context, so to speak, and makes them much more practical for me, and I hope for others who listen.
Masterpiece is driven by data and powered by content. Maximizing healthy longevity is achievable at all times with the right metrics and content, enabling informed decisions. Powered by Masterpiece can support your community in the critical areas of focus that drive healthy longevity for your residents, staff, and community. Learn more at mymasterpieceliving.com. We want to continue to provide information that is valuable and reliable to our listeners. We welcome your comments and suggestions for topics that are important to you. Please see the description of this episode to contact the Brightside team.
You've been listening to Dr. Roger and Friends, The Bright Side of Longevity. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.